Okay, this is part 1 of Unit 13, and Unit 13 deals with World War II. And there are tons and tons of things that we could cover about World War II. It's an enormous topic. It's very important in United States history and world history, obviously. But unfortunately, we just don't have time to go through probably all of it as much as you would like. In fact, when I was in college, there's courses dedicated just to this war. So there are vast topics that we could cover, but there are certain things that we do have to cover. If there's anything else that you'd like to learn more about, I encourage you to ask me in class, and I can perhaps point you in the right direction, or we can maybe spend some time on it in class. But one thing we do need to cover are some basic things, and what I want to start with here in part 1 is kind of some background information. Okay, so let's take a look at Germany in the 1930s. Now, one thing that I want you to remember is what's happening in Germany is going to be typical in some other countries as well. We don't have time to go through every country. So just kind of apply what we're talking here to other countries that are, similar to Germany in World War II. One thing that you have to remember is that the Great Depression is a worldwide event. Remember, especially when the United States passed the Hawley-Smoot tariff, it really affects other countries, and Germany is probably the hardest hit by the Depression. Make sure you know that. So all the things we learned about what it was like to live in the United States during the 30s, well, it's worse in Germany. So unemployment's worse, homelessness is worse, there's more businesses and banks going under, all those kinds of things. Okay? This creates super duper inflation in Germany. Inflation just means a rise in prices. Basically to the point where the German dollar, or the Deutschmark, was basically worthless. It was just paper. It wasn't valuable at all. In fact, there's stories of kids playing blocks with stacks of money because it was so invaluable. There's a story that I like where inflation was happening so fast that a man at a coffee shop ordered a cup of coffee, and by the time he ordered a refill, it had gone up in price. And when we say up in price, we're talking basic necessities of life were costing thousands and thousands of dollars. A typical example, as I've read, is sometimes it got so bad that one loaf of bread was equal to 1 month's wage. Well, you can imagine when that's happening, how hard it is to make ends meet and things like that. So Germany, make sure you know, is really suffering. A lot of this has to do from the Treaty of Versailles and the reparations payments that go along with that. That's something that's important. But this is the stage that Adolf Hitler comes into play at. He comes in a time when the country is weak, it's vulnerable. They are looking for a strong leader, just like the United States was. FDR basically says, hey, I'm going to try some things and we're going to get out of this. Hitler says the same things. His slogan is, basically work and bread. I'm going to promise you work and bread, and then I'm going to restore Germany to greatness. Those are the cornerstones of his message. So he comes to power at a time when people are kind of looking for someone to take control because they're desperate, just like they are in the United States, maybe even more desperate in Germany because things are worse there. Hitler joins a political party called the Nazis. So the Nazis are a political party, just like Republicans or Democrats in our country. It stands for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And basically what the Nazis stand for is that the problem in our country is from the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles was the work of Jews and communists, who Hitler sees to be kind of the same thing. If you're a Jew, you're a communist. If you're a communist, you're a Jew, kind of thing. And so he basically, this is a radical party. This is kind of a fringe party when he joins it. And they're basically, like I said, advocating, violent change or radical change or drastic change because the people in power are controlled by the Jews and the communists, and they're the ones that gave us the Treaty of Versailles, which is making our life so difficult. Eventually, what Hitler and the Nazis try to do is there's so much unrest in the country, they decide to try to take over the country through violent means in what we call a coup d'etat. And so their plan is they're going to march through the streets in Munich first, and they're going to gather support and say, hey, come join us, we're enough of this stuff, we're gonna go take control of the country and all this kind of stuff, and get rid of those people that are causing all the problems. And their plan is, as they march, they're going to draw people to them. You know, people in the police, people in the military, just average people are going to join our cause. We'll march on the Capitol in Berlin, and we'll just demand power and get rid of the government through force. That's their plan. It doesn't work very well. Not too many people join them, and they are arrested and caught. The police and the army put the coup down. And what ends up happening is Hitler then gets put on trial, and the trial becomes very famous. It's like the huge event. It's a media sensation. And Hitler, during the trial, gives these very impassioned speeches. He's a pretty good speaker, and he's basically, you know, speaking for the German people. He says that we've had enough of this. You know, we've got to do something, and you guys are sitting on your butts, not doing anything. He gives these great speeches, and that's what puts Adolf Hitler on the map. That's what makes him famous. What makes him well known in the country, because again, the Nazis, when they start out, are a very small party. They don't have a lot of members. They're not really influential. But when they try to do this, they gain more popularity, more exposure, of course, and that's one of the benefits, or one of the effects of this failed coup. He ends up going to prison, but not very long. He kind of gets a slap on the wrist from the judge, and while in prison, he writes his famous book called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, and in there he lays out his plans for Germany's future, what he would do basically if he was in charge. And this becomes a national bestseller. It becomes very widely read, sells hundreds of thousands of copies, and this of course helps to spread his fame and notoriety as well. And this is what puts Hitler on the path then to becoming a powerful person in Germany. And as time goes on, you know, he's going to give more speeches and become more wide known. And what most of his speeches are filled with, and what you'll see in Mein Kampf, is the problem is the Jews. The Jews becomes his scapegoat. And so the term for that is what we call anti-Semitism. That's prejudice or hatred of Jews. And that's in a lot of his speeches and his propaganda, and especially in his book Mein Kampf. He talks about how the Jews are to blame. The Jews are the ones that sold us out in World War I. They're the ones that stopped the war and signed that stupid treaty that's causing all this problem. They're the scapegoats. And I should point out that Hitler's not inventing anti-Semitism. That's something that already exists. Jewish people have been targeted for many, many years in Europe, and there's already a good section of the people that don't like Jews anyway. He's just using that as a rallying point. He's using the Jews as a scapegoat, as someone we can blame our troubles on. And we'll get to more of that in our unit on the Holocaust that we'll spend time on later. But just know that that's what he's preaching, and that's where a lot of that comes from, is this idea that the Jews are the ones to blame for Germany's current situation. And so through all of this, Hitler eventually and the Nazis start to gain popularity. They start to win some elections and get some seats. Hitler gets elected to the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, and eventually from there he consolidates his power until he becomes chancellor in 1933. Now he is elected there. He's put in power through legal means, and chancellor basically is like our president. You're the top dog, and he gets rid of von Hindenburg, who was the Democratic people's choice before, and a lot of people think that, you know, Hitler just wants to be famous and gets this position of power. We can control him from behind the scenes. He's inexperienced. He'll be like a puppet for us. So, you know, he just wants to be the guy in the front and get all the cheers and all that. He's not really interested in running the government. So that's a lot of the other rivals at the time kind of think that, and they kind of think, you know, maybe let's just give him what he wants to kind of keep him happy. And once he gets that, he'll be, you know, easy to control, kind of like what a lot of people thought about Teddy Roosevelt. So in 1933, through peaceful means, Hitler becomes chancellor, basically the leader of Germany. But they're very quickly wrong about Hitler. Within a year, Hitler gets rid of the democracy in Germany and creates an empire called the Third Reich. This is the third great empire in German history. And he basically bans any other parties other than the Nazi parties. He gets rid of his rivals. He gets rid eventually of the Reichstag. and basically puts himself as a dictator, as absolute ruler of Germany. So within a year, he basically dissolves all of the democracy and is basically the absolute ruler of Germany. It's called the Third Reich. It's supposed to last for 1,000 years with him at the top wielding absolute power. So again, he comes in at the right time during the Depression. He kind of takes advantage of that, use that to create a message that really reaches a lot of people as things gets worse in Germany. Hitler becomes more radical and he becomes more famous, and things kind of snowball from there. So let's just kind of break this part down a little bit more, because I think it's important. Students often want to know, well, why was Hitler put in power? How could this guy rise to the top? You know, what were the German people thinking? So let's just go through a couple things, because there's a couple things I want to really stress too. Well, one is certainly the timing is right. This might be the key to the whole thing, because before this, when things were going well in Germany, Hitler was still making speeches saying a lot of the same things, but the Nazis weren't getting a lot of attention or a lot of votes. There weren't a lot of people interested in what they were saying. But when things get bad, and when they get really bad, that's when people become more radical and want to go in a different direction. You saw that in our study of the Great Depression, where, you know, Huey Long gained some momentum because he was talking about radical idea of sharing the wealth. Well, there was a lot of people behind that, supporting that. In Cinderella Man, his friend, again, Mike, was trying to turn to communism, which, you know, most people in America hated, but at that time there was some support for it, because it was really different, and obviously what we're trying isn't working. We want to go in a way different direction. So the Depression might actually be the key. If without a Depression, people might not turn or look or become so desperate for a strong leader as they were. So that is certainly important. Two is he's a very, very good public speaker. Like FDR, when Hitler talks to you, it's almost like he's talking to you one-to-one. And what I've read, basically, Hitler gives the power to motivate people, to get them to actually take action. Now, you and I have probably heard lots of good speakers, and after they speak, a day or two later, we kind of forget what they said, and it doesn't really change our lives a whole lot, even though they were a good speaker. Well, apparently with Hitler, that wasn't the case. When he spoke, not only did he reach you, but he caused you to want to change your life and to take action. So he's very good at getting out his ideas and message. He's very good at motivating people. And in connection with that, we have this term propaganda again, which, if you don't remember, is kind of one-sided information. You're kind of getting a message out in a certain way. Hitler's very good at making himself look like the white knight, the good guy, the savior, and everyone else as the bad guy. He's very good at posters and speeches and movies and handbills and all these things that paint him in the correct light. He twists things enough. He shows things in just the right way to make him look good and everyone else, his opponents and everyone else, look bad. So he makes him look like the obvious choice. He's very good at this. The guy behind this really is one of the party members named Joseph Goebbels. He's the guy that does a lot of that, and he will become very important once Hitler even comes to power. 4 is the Treaty of Versailles. The reason that this is important is it's a unifying force. It's something that everyone in Germany kind of can agree on was a mistake, was, you know, horrible for Germany, is part of the problems, and it just something that everyone can unify. He basically uses the Treaty of Versailles as a rallying point to him and says, I'm going to tear this treaty up. We're going to get rid of it. It was horrible. They should have never signed it, and so on and so forth. So it's something that no matter who you are, you can say, yeah, I agree with that. Even if you don't agree with the other things he's saying, he says this the most often and the loudest. So when you think of Hitler, you think of this, and it's something that almost all Germans hate, and it's something that unifies them. And then the last one, and this is something that we cannot overlook, is politics in Germany at the time were different than politics than you and I are used to right now. Hitler was not afraid to get rid of rivals through violent means. Sometimes that might be just beating people up, or it might be actually killing people. He was not afraid to use violence. In fact, the Nazi Party had its own group called the Brown Shirts, or the SA. Basically, it was what we call a paramilitary group. It's not a military group, but it's as close to you can get. And their job was to just go beat people up that were rivals or talking bad against the Nazis or Hitler. And they often would go to other political parties' rallies and take people off stages and beat them up. Or if there's a particular part of a town or neighborhood or the country that they know weren't going to vote Nazi, they would send the SA in there to keep people from voting, so there would be less votes against Hitler and the Nazis. They would use these kind of tactics, and again, killing people was not out of the question. Usually it was more intimidation and that kind of stuff, but as he gets into power, you'll see more of that violence. He actually starts to get rid of some of his rivals as well. And so he was not afraid to use violence to get the results that he wanted either. So all these together are probably the reasons Hitler came to power, and students kind of want to know that a little bit. If I had to pick one, I would probably say the Depression, because without that coming along at the right time, his message, no matter how good it was, probably wouldn't appeal to a lot of people, because when things are going well, people don't like change, especially radical change that Hitler was talking about. When things are bad, people are more ready to listen to drastic change and drastic ideas because they're more desperate. They're, you know, ready to try anything. As you know, if you remember kind of what people were like in the United States. So that's a little background information about Germany and how Hitler came to power. Remember, that's going to be the same kind of thing that's going to happen in Italy with Mussolini. You're going to see that in Japan to some extent. You're going to see a lot of these people, a lot of these countries consolidating these power in one guy, because people are desperate for some strong leadership because they're going through some harsh times right now. And you see that to some extent even in the United States with FDR. You know, we talked about how people were willing to giving him a lot of power and let him do pretty much whatever he want, and he was elected 4 times. So it's not like that's just happening in Germany. I want you to remember that this is happening other places as well. But that's going to end part 1.